Let's talk about the digital revolution, should we? It's reshaping retail as we know it. There's a warning that nearly 1 million jobs could be lost due to the effects of the national living wage and online shopping. We're asking whether the UK can afford to pay the living wage when faced with such a downturn on the high street. Let's talk to Kate Smurthwaite, a feminist and comedian. And also joining us from central London is McLoughlin, Head of External Affairs at the Institute of Directors. Thank you both for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Kate, to you first of all, if I may. Can business afford the living wage?
Well, it's hilarious, isn't it, that the British Retail Consortium and people like the Institute of Directors are going, oh, we can't possibly afford this. I've yet to see anybody on the minimum wage, on the living wage, going, I don't really need this. I could probably get by with a little bit less. I don't understand what these companies are doing, how they are using people in a way that doesn't generate them, £8 an hour. If that's your business model, then I'm sorry, I think it's broken. I don't believe for a second that we're going to lose as many jobs as they're saying. But if we do have to lose some jobs, you know what, those businesses that close down will have to be replaced by businesses that have a better plan and a way of running things that is going to pay people a decent wage. And the other thing is this, is that if we pay people less than the money that they need to live on, what happens? Well, those people go into debt, those people don't buy the things that they need, and what happens? They get debt, they can't pay the debt back. That damages the economy massively. What happens when they don't buy things? Well, that closes down the retail sector in itself because people aren't buying stuff. The fact is, not only can we afford it, it's actually good for us, and it's actually a basic human right. If you're going to go out to work, you should be paid enough to live on. It's just not rocket science, and I think it's about time that these individuals, who I might add are all of them, as far as I can tell, on at least six-figure salaries, just show a little bit of humility and go, come on, let's find a way to make this work. It's not an unreasonable request.
Where's your humility, Jimmy?
Well, let me say that I believe that Britain can afford the national living wage. 90% of IOD members already pay it. We have 35,000 members right across the country in all different sectors. The vast majority are small companies, but as I say, 90% of them already pay it.
Let's go back to you, Kate, should we? And we've had an awful lot of emails and texts, as you can imagine, on this subject. Paul McLeod saying the question should be, why should taxpayers subsidise employers who don't pay a living wage? Reasonable point?
Well, first of all, those companies that pay below living wage, what happens is those employees then end up, needing support from other corners. That's exactly what happens. That's why it's called a living wage. If you don't get a living wage, you end up, in food banks. You end up looking to other places to support the basic requirements of your life. And, it's interesting, we heard that 90% of employers already pay it. And that's exactly why it needs to be legally enforced, because right now, the 10% that don't are at a financial advantage. And if we create a business environment in which those who don't pay it have better profits than those that do pay it, of course those that don't pay it, those companies get bigger and they'll end up taking over the ones that do pay it, and then there'll be more companies that don't pay it. The whole thing has the potential to escalate because it's driven by profit. This is exactly why we need to make it the law, and we need to be very clear about making sure that companies that are then subcontracting stuff out to other companies are still pushing through the living wage, so that cleaning contractors and people like that are still getting it. And we've heard recently that even some cleaning contractors working for government agencies aren't getting the living wage, and I think the government needs to sort itself out and make it clear that this is not an optional thing. It's for everyone.
Jimmy, you say 90% can, but that means presumably that 10% can't. Amanda Mitchell has tweeted us this afternoon. Hello, Amanda, saying, as a small company, we will have to reduce hours to cover the increases from suppliers and wages to remain competitive. She is in Norfolk this afternoon. Reasonable point?
That is a reasonable point. And of course, when it comes to these debates, there will be people that put forward the fact, why can't we have £10 minimum wage? Why can't we have a £15 national living wage at the same time? But actually, you do have this trade-off of where you will lose workers. I was interested to hear Kate say that actually that she doesn't mind the fact that jobs are going to go. There is an estimation that 60,000 jobs will be lost because of this. But when we have, at a time of record high employment, that is a trade-off that can be made.
Fewer but better jobs is the argument, Kate.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if there are people out there being hired to do something that doesn't genuinely, generate for a big company, £8 an hour of income, then I'm kind of forced to ask, what is it that they're doing, And if they're actually do-gooders, as it were, if they're charities, then they can look for volunteers and they can look for other sources of funding to help support them. But we do nothing good for our society if we leave people within it expected to get by on less than they need to survive, because that simply puts greater burdens on charities. And that doesn't solve any of the problems. So, yes, we can afford it. And of course, there might be jobs that are lost, but there are also, then there are more people out there looking for jobs. And, it's not a kind of a zero-sum game. We don't go, well, if one person lost their job. Actually, these things move around, and perhaps that person is then going to, start something new up, and we're going to, see more up-and-coming businesses, and we're going to see some of the big retailers being forced to actually, do the decent thing. And, speaking as somebody myself, I take shows up to the Edinburgh Fringe, and I always employ people when I'm up there, and I would never dream of paying anybody less than £10 an hour. I would be like, that doesn't seem right to me when I'm asking them to be part of the team and do something important, and that, that would put me at a financial disadvantage against big corporations that are happy, to pay the absolute bare minimum that they can get away with. And I don't think that makes life better for smaller organisations. I think it makes it worse. That's exactly why we have to go make it the law, make it a good level, and then let's keep, edging it up gently. I'm not suggesting we go for £10 overnight, but, I don't see why £10 isn't achievable in the long run. And indeed, as inflation keeps rising, we have to make sure that we maintain a reasonable standard of living for those people in Britain who are going out and putting in their time and effort, working really hard. Surely that's not too much to ask, especially while we can afford Trident, we can afford to leave a third of the world's money offshore in tax havens where it's not being taxed at all. And you're telling me that people working long shifts, often into the night, we can't afford, £7.50 an hour for them? Well, I'm afraid to say that the wealthy individuals in suits that say these sort of things, that their words fall on very deaf ears in my case.
Jimmy, the Chancellor's saying £9 an hour by 2020. Do you think £10 an hour is achievable?
In the long term, sure. But can I just emphasise the fact that people going to work derive many benefits from it. It's not just simply about pay. Of course, that's the overriding reason why people go to work, but there are many benefits in terms of social interaction that you see from work as well. And that's why, and also the fact that people will pay more if they have, employees will pay more to their employees if they are paying them a higher wage, and they will train them much more, which can only be a good thing when we need to upskill the workforce in the UK. You were talking about the digital economy and the fact that this year, and this doesn't get talked about enough, 12.5% of UK GDP will come from the internet economy. That makes us number one in the world. It makes us 50% ahead of South Korea. It is a remarkable statistic that we don't talk about enough. We should be incredibly proud of this, but at the same time, we have many deficits around that in terms of our broadband provision, which we've released the report on today, but also the skills as well. And that's why it is important to make sure that workers earn a decent wage and that they are trained properly. For the changing nature of work is happening quicker than ever with the internet. This is something that we should embrace.
OK, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Please both come back soon and debate it further. We appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you.
Thank you.